Rain hammered the cracked windshield of the sedan parked behind the shuttered Bayshore Mall, each drop hitting like a tiny fist demanding entry. Allara Rivera sat in the driver's seat at 2:27 in the morning, her hands shaking as she counted the crumpled bills spread across her lap for the 7th time that night. $200. That was all that remained in the world, bills she had pulled from a gas station bathroom trash after Robert Hargrove destroyed her apartment in a rage, scattering the life she had rebuilt into ash and splinters. The envelope lay on the passenger seat, its edges worn from her handling it obsessively over the past 3 days. Final notice. The words were stamped in red ink like a curse that could not be erased. $150,000 or lose custody of Emma in 14 days. 14 days. She glanced over her shoulder at her daughter sleeping in the back seat, wrapped in a donated blanket that smelled like a stranger's detergent. Emma's small chest rose and fell with the steady breathing of a child who did not yet understand that her world was collapsing like a house built on sand. 7 years old. The only thing Allara had managed to protect in a life that had systematically taken everything else. A black SUV glided past on the street beyond the parking lot, its tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Sleek. Predatory. Expensive in a way that made Allara's stomach tighten. The kind of vehicle that belonged to people who could solve problems. People who had options. The headlight swept across her windshield and vanished into the humid Miami night. 3 hours earlier, she had washed her face in a gas station bathroom with paper towels and cold water so cold it felt like punishment. The mascara she had borrowed from a coworker streaked down her cheeks in black rivers. She had pulled Emma's clothes from the backpack, everything they owned in this world fit in one worn piece of luggage that weighed more than hope. 2 pairs of jeans. For shirts. Underwear. A photograph of Emma's father, who had died 4 years ago and who would have known what to do. Who would have fought this and won. But Allara had no one. She had the $200. She had Emma. She had a car that ran on fumes and prayers that felt increasingly pointless. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof like an animal trying to get inside. Lightning split the sky in a jagged line, illuminating the empty parking lot in shades of white and shadow. Thunder followed 2 seconds later, close enough that Allara felt it vibrate through her ribs. The air tasted metallic, like rust and copper and endings. She reached over the seat and adjusted Emma's blanket, smoothing it across her daughter's small shoulders. The child did not stir. She had learned not to stir easily anymore, had learned to sleep through hunger and the sounds of Allara crying in the front seat where she thought Emma could not hear her. Children were not supposed to learn that lesson so young. "We'll figure it out, baby," Allara whispered, though she had no idea how. The words were not a promise. They were a prayer to a God she no longer believed in, spoken into the darkness of a parked car behind a shuttered mall in a city that had swallowed her whole and forgotten to spit her out. The red and blue neon of a distant pawn shop bled across the wet windshield, casting her face in alternating colors. Red. Blue. Red. Blue. Like a heartbeat that would not stop, that kept on going even when you wanted it to stop, even when every beat hurt. For hours from this moment, everything would change. For hours from now, Allara Rivera would find something beneath a bus stop bench on the corner of 5th and Meridian that would pull her into the orbit of the most dangerous man in Miami. A man whose name was Alessandro Rossi. A man whose 2 silent children had not spoken a single word since the night their mother died 3 years ago. A man who made empires bend and break with a single word. A man whose world was built on blood and code and the understanding that mercy was a luxury the powerful could not afford. But Allara did not know this yet. She only knew the rain. She only knew the $200. She only knew that in 14 days, she would lose the only thing that mattered, and there was no force in heaven or earth that could stop it. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the worn headrest. The drumming of the rain filled her ears, filled her chest, filled the spaces where hope had once lived. Outside, the city glittered with the lives of people who had not learned yet what it felt like to be erased. People who slept in beds with clean sheets. People who woke up knowing they would eat. People who did not count their money in parking lots while their children slept in the back seat. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the day that started it all, to the man whose fists had destroyed her apartment and scattered everything she had built like ashes in the wind. To Robert Hargrove, who was walking through Miami in this very moment, already making plans to take what he had promised to take. To the fire that had forced her to run, carrying only Emma and the desperate belief that she could hide long enough for the law to protect them. Let us go back to 6 months earlier, when Allara still had an apartment, and a job, and bruises she could no longer hide. 6 months earlier, on a Tuesday night when the city exhaled smoke and the streetlights cast everything in sickly yellow, Allara Rivera turned her key in the lock of apartment for C. Emma, age 4, was asleep on her hip, one small hand curled around her mother's neck, the other still gripping a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. The hallway smelled like someone's dinner, cumin and onions, and Allara breathed it in like a prayer, like proof that other people's lives continued, normal and whole, while hers fractured in the darkness. She pushed the door open. The smell hit first. Not cumin. Not onions. Gasoline. Thick and choking and wrong. Robert Hargrove stood in her living room in the dark, backlit by the glow of the street below, and in his right hand he held a silver lighter. His left hand was wrapped in gauze. His eyes were not focused. Not quite there. You think you can just leave me? His voice came out wrong, slurred, dangerous, like a record playing at the wrong speed. You think you can just run away with my kid? Allara's body moved before her mind caught up. She pulled Emma closer, felt her daughter's body stiffen as she woke, as she sensed something ancient and wrong in the room. Robert, please. Emma's right here. Please, just. He flicked the lighter. The flame caught the gasoline-soaked couch like a scream. Fire exploded across the fabric in a wave of orange and black and heat so immediate that Allara's eyes watered before she even registered what was happening. Flames raced up the curtains, across the bookshelf where Emma's baby photos lived, where Allara kept the one picture of her own mother. Mama! Emma's scream was small and pure and absolutely terrible. Allara did not think. She ran. Through the living room, through the smoke that was already thickening, that already tasted like ash and endings. Her lungs burned. Emma was screaming, her small fists hitting Allara's shoulders, and Allara ran down the hallway, down the concrete stairs, her feet thundering against each step like a countdown. Behind them, the fire roared like a living thing. The night air hit her like a slap. She collapsed on the sidewalk, gasping, coughing, Emma still locked around her like a life raft. Other people emerged from the building. A woman in a robe screamed into her phone. The sound of sirens began somewhere in the distance, approaching like a prophecy. A firefighter wrapped a silver blanket around them both. Through the haze of shock and smoke and her own ragged breathing, Allara watched her apartment burn. The window on the 4th floor exploded outward from the heat, showering glass onto the street below. It caught the streetlight and glittered like diamonds. Emma's body shook against hers. Not from cold. From terror. It's okay, baby. It's okay. Mama's here. Mama's here. Allara whispered the lie over and over, a prayer without faith. The next morning, standing in the ashes of what had been her home, Allara held the one thing that had survived. A photograph in a frame that should not have survived anything. Emma on her first birthday, wearing a dress Allara's mother had sewn by hand, wearing a smile so wide it consumed her entire face. The glass of the frame was cracked in a perfect diagonal line, like a scar. Everything else was gone. The birth certificates that proved Emma existed. The medical records. The lease that proved they lived there. The savings account that had held $3,000 just the week before, already spent on a lawyer who had told her, in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee, that she might need to file for full custody, that Robert would try to take her, that nothing was certain anymore. Emma wore clothes borrowed from the Red Cross donation center. A size too large, with a stain on the sleeve that might have been chocolate or might have been something worse. She held Allara's hand and did not ask questions. The apartment manager, a tired man in his 60s with liver spots on his hands, shook his head as he surveyed the wreckage. No renter's insurance. His voice was not unkind, which somehow made it worse. I thought I had it. I thought. Allara stopped. There was no point explaining. She had called the insurance company from the police station that morning and learned that her coverage had lapsed 6 months ago. One missed payment, one letter she had not seen, and everything she owned had stopped being insured. Total loss, the adjuster had said. The words held the weight of a casket closing. 3 hours later, at the Miami Police Department, Officer Davis, a man Robert had known since high school, a man who had come to their engagement party 3 years ago, sat across from Allara with his fingers steepled in front of his face like a man preparing for church. So you're saying Robert was in your apartment? His pen hovered above his notepad, not writing. Yes. I found him there. In the dark. With a lighter. Allara's voice shook. She had not slept. She could not remember the last time she had eaten anything solid. And you saw him light the fire. The lighter was in his hand. The couch was on fire. He? You actually saw him ignite the gasoline. It was dark. He was there. The fire. Officer Davis set his pen down. He looked at her the way a teacher looks at a student who has given the wrong answer to a very simple question. Ms. Rivera, Robert's a good guy. I've known him for 20 years. He coaches youth soccer. His family goes to church. He leaned back in his chair, which creaked like it was tired of supporting the weight of injustice. Maybe you should think about why he's upset. You were with him for 4 years. Sometimes relationships end badly. Doesn't mean there's a crime. Allara stood to leave. We'll file a report, he said, but without witnesses or proof, there's not much we can do. He'll probably say you left the stove on. These things happen. Allara walked out into the Miami heat, and the door closed behind her with the sound of finality. That night, Robert texted her from a number she did not recognize. The message was 5 words long. This is just the beginning. She did not respond. She did not sleep. For 3 months, Allara lived in her car. A 2009 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a seat that reclined only halfway. She parked it behind the shuttered Westchester Mall, where the chain-link fence had gaps and the security cameras had stopped working years ago. Emma slept on the back seat with a blanket Allara had bought at a thrift store for $4. Allara sat in the driver's seat and stared at the darkness and listened to her daughter's breathing. The cold came in November. Not the killing cold of northern winters, but the kind that seeped into your bones anyway, the kind that made your fingers ache as you pumped gas or counted coins. Allara worked double shifts at the diner, leaving Emma with Mrs. Chen, the owner's mother, who watched her for free because Mrs. Chen had seen the news story about the fire and had the kind of heart that would not let a child suffer for the world's cruelty. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Allara walked to the library to use the computers. She researched custody law at a desk in the corner, surrounded by the smell of old paper and the hum of air conditioning she could no longer afford. The screen glowed against her exhausted face. Custody battles cost money. Lawyers cost $10,000 minimum, sometimes more. Court filings cost money. Filing fees. Witness testimony. Everything cost money that Allara did not have. Then the letter arrived. Allara found it tucked under her windshield wiper, official and white and stamped in red letters that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Final notice. The debt collector wanted $150,000 in 14 days or they would petition the court for custody transfer to Robert Hargrove, who had filed paperwork claiming that Allara was living in a vehicle, unable to provide stable housing, unable to guarantee her daughter's safety. $200 in her wallet. $150,000 demanded by a system that believed Robert's lawyer's words more than it believed her eyes, her scars, her survival. The math was not complicated. The answer was not complicated. She could not win. Emma asked, as she always did, on a cold morning when the windows had fogged with their breath, "Mama, when do we get a house?" Allara pulled her daughter close. Emma's hair smelled like the cheap shampoo from the dollar store, and something else, something like fear, like knowing that home was not a place but a person, and that person was barely holding on. Soon, baby. Soon. She did not know, as she whispered that lie, that 2 miles away, in a penthouse apartment with a view of Biscayne Bay, Robert Hargrove was having a conversation with a woman named Sophie Langford. Sophie, whose family owned shopping centers and office buildings. Sophie, whose father had donated to the right judges' campaigns. Sophie, who was holding a glass of wine and listening to Robert explain that Allara was a terrible mother, that she had made his life impossible, that custody of Emma should be his, that it would take only a signature, only a few conversations in the right rooms. Sophie smiled. She had been looking for a project, and Robert had always been handsome. "We can make this happen," she said, and it was a promise that sounded like a curse. But Allara did not know this yet. The penthouse trembled with silence. Alessandro Rossi stood at floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he owned through fear and loyalty codes written in blood. His suit, tailored Italian wool, charcoal grey, worth more than most people's cars, hung perfectly on shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a criminal empire. A scar ran from his left eye to his jaw, pale against olive skin, a permanent reminder of the night his own brother had led enemies to Isabella's door. Behind him, his 2 sons sat at the piano, identical in every way except one. Leo held his hands poised above the keys while Luca stared at them like they were weapons he didn't know how to use. 2 years. 61 months. 2,243 days since their mother died and their voices died with her. The doctors called it selective mutism. The therapists called it trauma response. Alessandro called it the reason he destroyed 3 men last week and the reason he would destroy 3 more before the sun set. Marco entered without knocking, as he always did, his expensive shoes soundless against Italian marble. Marco, who had worked for Alessandro for 15 years and had never seen him cry, who had never seen him pray, who had never seen him sit beside anyone with the gentleness he sometimes showed his sons when he thought no one was watching. "She's here," Marco said. Alessandro didn't turn from the window. The woman who returned the wallet. Downstairs. With her daughter. "She's nervous." Something shifted in Alessandro's chest, not hope, because Alessandro Rossi had surrendered hope the night Isabella stopped breathing. But something close to it. Something dangerous and foreign. "Bring her up," he said. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, in a corner office on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Brickell, Sophie Langford was making promises she intended to keep. Sophie, whose family owned shopping centers and office buildings and judges who answered their phones at midnight. Sophie, who had been listening to Robert Hargrove explain his vision for custody, and who saw in him the perfect tool for a project she'd been considering. She held a crystal glass of wine that cost more than a month of Allara Rivera's rent, not that Sophie knew who Allara Rivera was yet. But she would. Very soon. "The homeless angle is perfect," Sophie was saying, her voice smooth as expensive silk. "No judge will give custody to a woman living in her car. Not when there's a father willing to provide stability." Robert leaned forward, his smile sharp. "Exactly. And once I have Emma, Allara has nothing. She becomes irrelevant." Sophie touched her phone. Connections began to activate: a journalist she knew, a social worker she'd funded, a family law specialist who owed her a favor. The machinery of privilege and power began to turn, invisible and inexorable as a blade through water. Back in the penthouse, Allara climbed the stairs with Emma's hand in hers, her worn backpack slung over one shoulder. Her jeans had a hole at the knee. Her shirt, rescued from a donation bin behind a Goodwill 3 weeks ago, had a faint stain near the collar that had never quite come out. But her eyes, when they met Alessandro's, held something no amount of money could buy. Recognition. Dignity. The quiet strength of someone who had been broken and had chosen not to shatter. "This is Emma," Allara said. Her voice trembled slightly, barely a whisper, like a candle flame in wind that might extinguish it at any moment. Emma was 6 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and a worn stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. she looked around the penthouse with an expression that broke something in Alessandro's chest, not amazement at the luxury, but calculation. How long could they stay here? Where would they go when this ended? Leo and Luca had stopped playing. They watched Allara and Emma with the unnerving intensity of children who had learned young that the world was dangerous and unpredictable. "They're silent," Alessandro said, and it wasn't a question. "Since my wife died," he continued, each word careful, measured. 2 years. No voice. No sound except when they sleep. Even then, nothing. The dreams don't come out. Allara knelt down, slowly, giving the boys time to object or move away. They didn't. Leo, the slightly bolder of the two, extended his hand toward her backpack. Allara smiled. "Do you want to see what I have?" From the backpack, she withdrew a small stuffed rabbit, nearly identical to Emma's but worn with love and time. She held it out. "His name is Mr. Hopper's cousin. Mr. Floppy. He's very shy, so he doesn't like to talk much either. But he's a very good listener." Luca's eyes widened. His mouth opened slightly, as if sound might emerge, but nothing came. Instead, he reached out with both hands and took Mr. Floppy, pressing the toy against his chest. Marco and Sal exchanged a glance. In 15 years, they had never seen the twins respond to anyone this way. In 15 years, they had never seen Alessandro's expression shift from controlled fury to something that looked like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "I want to hire you," Alessandro said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Caretaker for Leo and Luca. You live here, in the guest house. Your daughter attends the same school. Full healthcare. $60,000 annually." Allara's breath caught. 60,000. The number hung in the air like a reprieve, like a miracle, like the moment a condemned woman is told the execution has been stayed. "There's more," Alessandro continued. "The debt collector's letter. The one demanding $150,000 in 14 days. Paid in full within 48 hours. Allara's hands shook. She stood up, needing distance, needing to process. "Why would you do this?" "Because you returned something precious when you could have taken everything," Alessandro said. "Because my sons need someone who understands what it means to survive. Because in 2 weeks, Robert Hargrove plans to take your daughter, and I don't permit that to happen to people under my protection." The word hung there, protection. Not charity. Not pity. Protection. A code, ancient and unbreakable. "What do you want in return?" Allara asked. "Help them find their voices," Alessandro said. "That's all." 2 hours later, Allara and Emma moved into the guest house, a full structure with 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, windows that looked out onto gardens that bloomed with orchids and bougainvillea. Emma ran from room to room, her footsteps echoing on marble tile, leaving the sound of a child who might finally believe in safety. Allara stood in the kitchen and cried. Not loud sobs, but silent tears that fell into her palms like rain onto asphalt, washing away the grit and desperation of months lived on the edge of nothing. At that same hour, in her Brickell office, Sophie Langford was reviewing the fabricated documents her hired investigator had prepared. Photographs of the estate. Testimony from a social worker claiming inadequate supervision. Medical records, all forged, suggesting Allara had been negligent about Emma's healthcare. It was beautiful work. Ruthless. Effective. By next week, she'll be arrested for endangerment, Sophie told Robert over the phone. By the week after, Emma will be in your custody. And Ross's protection won't matter because once she's convicted, even criminals won't touch her. Robert laughed, a sound like breaking glass. She'll be destroyed. What he didn't understand was that he was moving against a woman who had already lost everything and discovered that losing everything meant she had nothing left to fear. The first night in the guest house, Emma slept holding Mr. Floppy. Allara sat on the edge of her daughter's bed and watched her breathe, each breath a victory, each dream a second chance. In the main house, 2 floors above, Leo and Luca held Mr. Floppy between them, trading it back and forth silently, their fingers brushing, communication happening in the language of touch and presence that transcends words. And Alessandro stood in his office, looking at the photograph of Isabella that hung on his wall, his wife with Leo and Luca at 6 months old, all three of them laughing at something now lost to time. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Marco. Begin surveillance on Robert Hargrove and Sophie Langford. I want to know where they go, who they meet, what they plan. And Sal, start the paperwork on the debt. Clean it up. Remove it from existence. The machinery of power began to turn. Not the machinery of cruelty, but the machinery of protection. The machinery of a man who had learned that the only thing worth having was something worth protecting. And in the darkness, the rain began. Gentle at first, then harder, drumming against windows like a heartbeat returning to a body that had been still for far too long. The rain hammers against the windshield like a judge's gavel, each drop a verdict Allara Rivera cannot escape. Inside the car, the air tastes like rust and resignation. Her hands grip the steering wheel so hard her knuckles have turned white, the skin stretched tight as paper over bone. Emma sleeps in the back seat, curled beneath a donated blanket that smells of mildew and previous owner's desperation, her small chest rising and falling with the innocence of a child who doesn't yet understand that tomorrow they might be torn apart forever. Allara's phone buzzes. A text message from Robert, see you in court tomorrow. Say goodbye to Emma. Her breath catches. The words are a blade, and she feels them cut something essential inside her chest. She looks at the dashboard where the letter sits, final notice in letters so black they seem to bleed into the darkness. 3 weeks ago she was standing in a mansion with marble floors and a man who moved like power itself. 3 weeks ago the debt was erased, the threat was over. 3 weeks ago everything was burning bright like a star about to collapse. Then Sophie Langford appeared on every news channel in Miami, dressed in white like an angel sent to expose corruption. Her voice was honey and venom mixed together. This woman, Sophie said, pointing to Allara's photograph, one from her worst days, skin hollow, eyes dead, has infiltrated Alessandro Ross's family using her daughter as a pawn. She's a drug abuser. A neglectful mother. She's using his wealth to hide her crimes. The footage was doctored so perfectly that reality itself seemed to bend. Photos spliced, timestamps altered, Allara's face superimposed over crime scenes she'd never seen. Within hours, the story exploded across social media. By evening, trending. By next morning, Child Protective Services showed up at the estate with police officers, their faces grim with duty. Allara sits in the parked car now, in the same spot behind the shuttered mall where she'd slept weeks ago, and the circle feels complete. She pulls the $200 from her pocket, the money Alessandro had given her, which she refused to spend, and she counts it for the 100th time. $200. That's what stands between Emma and nothing. A car pulls up beside hers. The headlights cut through the rain. Alessandro steps out, soaked, his expensive suit clinging to his broad shoulders, his dark eyes burning with something Allara has never seen before, panic. Real, raw, uncontrolled panic. He knocks on her window. She rolls it down slowly. The rain is cold against her face. You left, he says. Not a question. A wound. I had to, Allara whispers. They're saying I'm unfit. That I'm using you. That Emma, her voice breaks. If I'm not around, maybe they'll leave her alone. Maybe she'll have a chance. Alessandro grips the edge of the window. You're not thinking clearly. Fear is lying to you. Fear is keeping her safe, Allara says. Every second I'm in your life, in your world, it puts her in danger. The courts will see that. They already do. Alessandro leans down, his face level with hers. My son spoke today. For the first time in 2 years, Leo and Luca opened their mouths and said words. Real words. Do you know what they said? Allara shakes her head. Your name, Alessandro says. They asked for you. They asked where you were. And Marco told me something that changed everything. Luca didn't just speak, he said your name like it was a prayer. Like it was the only word that mattered in the entire world. The rain intensifies. Thunder rolls across the Miami sky like a warning. I'm not made for this, Allara says, but her voice wavers. I'm nobody. I've always been nobody. Alessandro straightens up. He looks at her, really looks at her, and when he speaks, his voice comes out low and solid like an oath. You walked into my life with nothing, and you gave my sons back their voices. You came to our home broken, and somehow you made us whole. The people who are calling you nobody are terrified because they know what I know, you are everything. Allara's hands are shaking. She wants to believe him. She's terrified she does. Come back with me, Alessandro says. It's not a command. It's a plea. Let me protect you. Let me protect Emma. Not because you're helpless, but because that's what we do for the people he stops. The admission hangs in the rain between them. Marco's voice comes through Alessandro's phone, urgent and fast. Boss, you need to come back. Now. The boys, they're asking for her. Both of them. They won't stop. Luca just said her name again, clear as anything. Boss, they want Allara. Alessandro looks at her. Please. Allara looks back at Emma, sleeping peacefully in the back seat. She thinks about the purple flower pushing through cracked asphalt, alive against impossible odds. She thinks about two silent boys who found their voices. She thinks about a man who learned how to be gentle. She pulls the key from the ignition. Okay, she says. Okay. The drive back to the estate is silent except for the rain and the engine. When they arrive, Leo and Luca are waiting on the porch, Marco standing behind them in his dark suit. The moment they see Allara, both boys run toward her. Emma wakes up and tumbles from the car, curious and sleepy, and suddenly Allara is surrounded, 3 children, their small arms wrapping around her neck and waist, their voices a chorus of relief. You came back, Leo says. You didn't leave, Luca says, testing the words like new instruments. Allara sinks to her knees on the wet marble, pulling all 3 of them close, her body shaking with sobs she can no longer contain. Alessandro watches from the doorway, and Marco sees something in his boss's expression that he's never seen before, a man at peace. But across Miami, in a penthouse that overlooks the city like a throne room, Sophie Langford is watching the same live news feed on her television. A reporter stands in front of the Rossi estate, camera flashing, voice triumphant. In a stunning development, sources close to Alessandro Rossi confirm that his sons have recovered their speech. Child development experts are calling the catalyst, Allara Rivera, instrumental in their recovery. Charges against her are being dropped. Sophie's face twists. Her perfectly manicured fingers curl into fists. Beside her, Robert sits with his head in his hands, defeated. We're not done, Sophie hisses into her phone, calling allies who no longer answer. I want her destroyed. I don't care if it takes everything I have. What she doesn't understand is that everything she has is already crumbling. At dawn, the federal agents arrive. 12 of them in dark suits, moving like ghosts through her building, up the elevator, to her door. The evidence Marco and Sal have been compiling for weeks is irrefutable: falsified documents, recordings of bribery, emails linking Sophie to corrupt CPS agents, proof of conspiracy to commit fraud. Her family money cannot buy innocence once the truth is documented. Sophie is arrested on charges of racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy. The photographs of her being led out in handcuffs, her hair disheveled, her face stripped of its careful beauty, spread across every news outlet in minutes. Robert is picked up at his apartment building. He begs, collapses on the sidewalk, trembling like a cornered animal begging for mercy that won't come. Federal agents charge him with arson, stalking, assault, and conspiracy. Both face decades in prison. Sophie's family holds a press conference disowning her. Her business associates testify against her. Her allies scatter like rats abandoning a sinking ship. The public humiliation is total and absolute. 3 days later, Allara sits in Alessandro's study with Leo and Luca on either side of her, all of them watching the news anchor deliver the final sentence. Sophie Langford and Robert Hargrove will face federal trial on charges that could result in up to 40 and 25 years respectively. Allara Rivera, wrongly accused of child endangerment, has been fully exonerated. Court documents show she was the victim of a calculated conspiracy designed to separate her from her daughter. Emma is in school now. She's made friends. She laughs without fear. Allara turns to Alessandro. The rain has stopped. Outside the windows, Miami glitters beneath clear sky. It's over, he says. She nods, but she's thinking about something else. She's thinking about how 4 weeks ago she had $200 in her pocket and nothing else. She's thinking about a man with dark eyes who showed her that broken things can heal. She's thinking about 2 boys who found their voices and a girl who found her mother. Thank you, she whispers. Alessandro takes her hand. His grip is warm, solid, certain. Every day we choose between fear and trust, between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. You chose to open yours. You saved us all. 1 year later, the morning light filters through the windows of Allara's counseling office, soft and golden, catching dust motes that drift like tiny promises. The walls are painted pale yellow, a color she chose because it reminds her of hope, of the sun breaking through clouds after months of rain. Photographs cover the hope board behind her desk, women smiling, children laughing, families reunited, all of them marked with the same invisible tattoo that Allara carries: they survived. Emma bursts through the door at 3:11 in the afternoon, her school backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her face flushed with the kind of joy that only children who have known real fear can understand. "Mama, look what I drew," she shouts, pulling a piece of paper from her pocket, slightly crumpled, slightly wrinkled, perfect. Allara sets down her pen, the one Alessandro bought her on her first day here, and takes the drawing. It's a family portrait rendered in colored pencils, the kind of careful, deliberate work that children do when they're drawing something that matters. 5 figures holding hands, Allara in the center, tall and strong, her hair flowing down her back like a river. Emma to her left. And to her right, Alessandro, Leo, and Luca, all rendered in shades of brown and gold, all connected by a line that Allara understands means forever. "This is beautiful, baby," Allara whispers, and she pushes back her chair and stands, pulling Emma into an embrace that still feels like a miracle some days. The girl smells like crayons and playground dirt and the strawberry shampoo Alessandro insists on buying her. She smells like safety. Allara hangs the drawing on the wall beside 3 others that Emma has made in the past month. Each one tells the same story: we are a family, we stay, we don't leave. The front door opens with a soft chime, the doorbell she had installed specifically because she wanted to hear people arriving, to have warning, to never again be caught off guard. Alessandro steps through, his tailored charcoal suit immaculate, his dark eye scanning the room with that old habit of assessment before they land on Allara and soften completely. Leo and Luca tumble in behind him, both boys dressed in private school uniforms, both carrying backpacks that cost more than Allara used to make in a month. "Allara!" Luca shouts, and he sprints toward her with the kind of abandon that only children who have learned to trust can manage. Leo follows, more measured, more careful, but his smile is wide and genuine. These are boys who found their voices in the silence, who spoke her name when everyone believed they never would, and now they cannot stop speaking, cannot stop expressing the joy that lives inside them. "How was school?" Allara asks, ruffling Luca's hair as he wraps his arms around her waist. Leo leans against her leg, and she places a hand on his shoulder, grounding herself in the weight of him, the reality of him. "We got our science test back," Leo says, his voice steady and clear, each word a small miracle. "Both of us got us." "That's because they studied with you every night," Alessandro says, and there's something in his voice that Allara has learned to recognize over the past year, pride that goes deeper than accomplishment, pride that means he sees his sons as whole, as healed, as boys with futures instead of broken toys that need fixing. Emma tugs on Alessandro's sleeve. "Did you tell them about the new counseling program?" "Not yet, Bella," he says, and he looks at Allara with an expression that still catches her breath sometimes, even after 300 days of waking up beside him. Allara's office has grown in the past year. What started as a single room in a converted house on the edge of downtown Miami has expanded into a full non-profit organization. The House of Hope, they call it. It offers legal aid to women escaping domestic violence. It provides emergency housing, small apartments in a building that Alessandro purchased specifically for this purpose, his money converting concrete and drywall into sanctuary. It offers therapy, job training, childcare, all of it free because Allara understands the mathematics of poverty too well to charge women who are already counting pennies. The waiting room outside her office is never empty. There's usually a woman sitting there, her hands trembling, her eyes hollow, the specific look of someone who has been told she is nothing so many times that she's started to believe it. Sometimes there's a child pressed against her side. Sometimes there are bruises that makeup cannot quite hide. Last week, Allara sat with a woman named Patricia who had $43 in her pocket and a restraining order that her ex-husband had already violated 3 times. Allara knew the fear Patricia was carrying because she had carried it too. She knew the math, how to stretch $43 across a week, how to choose between eating and taking the bus to a job interview, how to lie to your child and tell them everything will be fine when you're not sure you believe it yourself. "We're opening a new program," Allara tells Alessandro now, and she can see Marco and Sal standing in the hallway outside her office, both men dressed in dark suits, both of them waiting with the patient stillness of men accustomed to standing guard. They've become fixtures here, these lieutenants who once worked for a crime boss and now work for something else entirely. They volunteer their time, help with security, make sure that no man ever follows a woman into the House of Hope with violence in his fists. "Tell me," Alessandro says, and he settles into the chair across from her desk, crossing his legs with the kind of ease that speaks of someone completely comfortable with power, with taking up space, with being listened to. "Job training," Allara says. "Full certification programs. We're partnering with 3 major companies in Miami. They've agreed to hire our graduates at living wages. We start next month." Alessandro leans back, and a smile spreads across his face, slow and genuine. "How much?" $25,000 to launch, Allara says. "Including supplies, instructors, childcare while the women are in class." He doesn't hesitate. "Done. I'll have Marco handle the paperwork tomorrow." Emma climbs into Allara's lap, and Leo settles at her feet with a book is pulled from the small shelf in the corner. He loves to read now, loves the sound of words, makes up for years of silence by filling every moment with language. Luca is asking Alessandro questions about something, probably the new car, a black SUV with tinted windows that arrived last week, sleek and dangerous looking, the kind of vehicle that makes people step aside on the street. This is home now. Not the mansion with its marble floors and Italian chandeliers, though that's home too. This is home. This office with its soft yellow walls, with Emma's drawings covering the Hope board, with the sound of children laughing while somewhere in the waiting room another woman sits gathering the courage to start again. Allara thinks sometimes about the night she had $200 and a letter stamped final notice, about sleeping in her car in the parking lot behind a shuttered mall, about the desperate mathematics of survival. She thinks about finding that wallet wedged beneath a bus stop bench, about the moment she decided that returning it was worth more than the money inside. She thinks about Alessandro's eyes when he realized she could have stolen from him but chose not to. The rain begins outside the window, a soft patter against the glass, the kind of rain that smells clean and new. Allara watches it for a moment, watching the world wash itself, and she realizes that everything that happened, the fire, the ashes, Robert's violence, Sophie's cruelty, the court battles, the federal investigations, all of it, was leading to this moment. To a room filled with children, to a man who learned that second chances exist, to women in the waiting room who will walk out of here with resources and hope instead of just despair. At 5:06 in the evening, Alessandro says, ready to go home, and Allara stands, gathering Emma into her arms, watching as Leo and Luca bound toward the door. Marco opens it from the outside. He's been standing guard there, patient and still, watching the street with the vigilance of someone whose job is to ensure nothing bad happens to the people he's been tasked to protect. The drive home takes 15 minutes, and during that time, Allara watches the city transform from the cramped, struggling neighborhoods where she used to work triple shifts to the gleaming downtown skyline, all glass and steel and promise. Alessandro's hand finds hers on the seat between them, warm and solid and real. The house Alessandro bought overlooks Biscayne Bay, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture, but what Allara loves most is the garden. There's a small stone bench where she sits sometimes, where she watched Alessandro months ago staring at a photograph of Isabella, his boy's mother, and understood that grief and love are the same thing viewed from different angles. She sat beside him that night and said she'd be proud of Leo and Luca. Of you. He looked at her, and something shifted, 2 years of numbness meeting 3 months of healing, and in that moment, Allara saw him not as a crime boss but as a man who had lost everything and was learning, very slowly, to trust again. The house is quiet when they arrive, but it's the kind of quiet that feels full instead of empty. Emma runs upstairs to change out of her school uniform. Leo and Luca disappear into the living room where their tutor has left homework for them, honors work, advanced placement material, because both boys are brilliant and determined to prove that their years of silence never diminish their minds. Alessandro finds Allara in the kitchen, and she's doing something ordinary, preparing dinner, chopping vegetables, filling the house with the smell of garlic and basil and possibility. He wraps his arms around her from behind, and his chin rests on her shoulder. "I love you," he says. He says it almost every day now, as if he's making up for all the years he went without speaking those words, all the years he believed that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. Allara leans back into him, and she feels the solid weight of him, the realness of him, and she knows that love is the only affordable luxury there is. "I love you too," she whispers. And outside, the rain continues to fall, washing the city clean, preparing it for tomorrow. Every day, Allara had learned, offers a choice. Fear or trust. Closing yourself off or opening your heart. She had been broken, had been told she was nobody, had counted her remaining dollars and wondered how she would survive. But she had returned that wallet. And in returning it, she had returned herself to the possibility of healing, of love, of a life that felt impossible until it wasn't. If this story moved your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the stories of people who chose courage when the world told them to give up. What would you have done if you were Allara? Would you have returned the wallet? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, we read every single one. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.